start with a quote. The quote says, "The most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they become indistinguishable from it." So this clearly describes a world in which smarts and intelligence are embedded all around us. It's the world, and in fact it's a very visionary quote, right? The whole, whether you're at home or at work or in your car, the environment will ultimately know who you are, what your needs and what your wants are. This is a quote from one of my colleagues in the late 80s, so quite a few decades old by now, when we were experimenting at the park, or Palo Alto Research Lab in California, with devices we called MPADs that the researchers were carrying, and if you entered the room, the light would go on, the temperature would adjust, etc. So this was long before even the terminology, the Internet of Things, or for sure Internet of Everything, was widely used. So when I think about, or when we think as Xerox about the Internet of Everything, I see three pillars. The first one is the everyday objects that will become smart. Again, you can see a set of objects here that already today are smart, and even many more will become smart, have intelligence embedded within them in the future. Then there's a smart infrastructure that really connects all of these things, connects humans, creates a connectivity in the infrastructure in the world we live in. And then finally, it is creating real-time insights out of sensing out of all these smart connected devices, and then acting and driving automated processes to better personalize, whether it's care or mobility or education. And so these are the three pillars that we think about. There could be more pillars, obviously. But today I'm briefly going to touch and give you a peek into the future of each of these three pillars. Let's start with the smart everyday objects. It's at the hype, it's at the top of the hype cycle, the Internet of Things. By 2020 there will be 50 billion devices connected. Multiple per person. You've all seen these numbers. Today most of the value doesn't come out of these consumer devices. It comes out of industrial devices such as engines that understand the speed of the wind, or that adjust themselves and potentially adjust the traffic pattern of the plane based on sensing their environment. As well as in multiple other industries, it's also expected that by 2020 the savings and the value of the Internet of Industrial Things will be about $1.7 trillion. So significant value. So let me go into, smart everyday objects. So the Internet of Things are these devices, whether it's wearables like Fitbits or other mobile devices that exist today. When we talk about the Internet of Everything, it is that ultimately smarts and intelligence can be embedded in our clothing, in all of the consumables, in packaging, again, all around us. And of course, key to that is that it is easy to do, it's affordable, it's energy efficient. And so let me tell you that today most of these devices are dumb, right? For example, one of my favorite bottles of wine, that's a dumb bottle. It doesn't know, yes it knows you can read the label as a human, but it doesn't really know the trajectory between the winery and then appearing on your table. So one of the, in fact we just launched this earlier this year in collaboration with Green Film, we print a very simple memory that you can track and that can embed information about what happened to this wine bottle from the winery all the way to your table. But it's still a fairly dumb device, not necessarily very smart. So but it's smart enough for certain applications, but over time more functionality can easily be added. Here you can see a fully printed label. Not only is there the memory, but also a sensor. This sensor could potentially be temperature, could be humidity, could be methane sensor. I mean, multiple different sensing, and then a simple readout display. And again, so now you could, for example, for this application also sense for your food or your wine, what was the temperature cycle this particular product went through. And so in the labs for the last 15 years, we have been experimenting with printing electronics that are required to create these ever smarter devices and then to enable everyday objects to become connected to the Internet of Things. You can see image sensors, they're flexible batteries, temperature sensors. A whole set of these devices or these circuitries can be used. Right now, all of these are fully printed. Of course, one of the key things will be to harvest energy out of the environment. You can't go change batteries in these billions of devices that are connected. And so in order to do that, you really need higher frequency devices. And so the key emergence of what's actually state-of-the-art today is hybrid electronics. You print whatever you can print, and then you place microelectronics devices where you need speed or where you need the capability, for example, in this case, to harvest energy. This is a sensor that we were able to really sense. I think it's pressure and flexibility, but it was, there's no power required because it harvested the energy out of the RF waves in the environment. So there are many other devices that are being prototyped. In fact, there is NextFlex is a consortium where the government has put significant money in. Multiple organizations are participating in it, and a lot of research is being done in multiple areas to integrate these flexible electronics together with silicon to really create those smart everyday objects. And so you can envision ultimately that these ubiquitous smart sensors that are all around us on our packaging, I mean, for health, etc., will really allow us to Google reality. Right now we Google information, right? What's the temperature outside, or what's smog outside? If you're in Asia, for example, should you go running outside or inside? In the future, you can truly Google reality by just checking somebody's temperature remotely, or somebody or many other information that you will be able to get if everything around us becomes smart. Can you get one of those for Trump? Yeah, that would be good. What would you like to sense? Yeah, that's right. He can Google reality then. That's right. Anyway, cool. So next is the smart infrastructure. I'm quickly going to go through these three, and then I would love to have a dialogue. And within the infrastructure, I'm going to focus on the digital information infrastructure, as well as on the battery, the energy infrastructure. So as you know, the internet today is significantly challenged, a huge amount of new connections. It's mostly content that is distributed, whether it's video or music, sound, and then in the future, of course, it's huge volumes of sensor data, but it's really content and information. And of course, there are many issues, and we discussed some in the previous discussion here just a few minutes ago. With reliability, like for example, people who had Nest sensors in their house, and then they went down, and then they had a hard time controlling their temperature, etc. But not only reliability, it's privacy, obviously. If you have all these cameras, these ubiquitous cameras all around us, or microphones, it's information security, as we discussed, as well as cyber physical security. And again, we also briefly touched, for those of you who are in the room, on the Mirai IoT botnet attack that happened just a few weeks ago on the East Coast. And so, of course, some of you have seen this picture that you, again, remotely can get into the baby monitors if they're not designed for security. And so that is, of course, an issue that we're all very familiar with the Internet of Everything, or the Internet of Things. And so, in fact, one of the issues is that the Internet itself was really designed, and it's very old. The Ethernet also came out of the Park Labs back in the 70s. And the current Internet is really designed as a telephone connection, right? It's a point-to-point. You dial a telephone number. I'm going to get to your server to get the information that I need. And so it's very similar today. So that often results in more heavy traffic and slow loading of web pages if everybody goes and wants the same information at the same time. Of course, there are patches that people have put on this. I have no time to talk about those. But there is also, I'm going to touch on a few breakthroughs. One of the breakthroughs is, instead of point-to-point communication with IP packets, the new way of, and a new standard that's emerging is information-centric networking. That, in fact, instead of asking for an address, you ask for a specific piece of content or a specific piece of information there are two leading organizations that are driving the standard. And basically what happens is you have an interest request from a consumer, and you get the information or the content back, and it gets stored across the network in servers across the network, so that you can easily, let's say if your neighbor is watching at the same time as you are, it's stored in edge servers that are, and also throughout the network. And ultimately, every packet, every piece of content is named, is authenticated, and is encrypted from the very beginning. So it's a way more secure approach also. So today we're still mostly talking about the Internet of Information, that is moving to these new standards and that we're all very familiar of. Things like the blockchain, right, is really, again, within the smart infrastructure, it's a way to have a secure asset delivery, which assets could be physical assets, like IBM just started a blockchain business, and one of the first customers is Walmart, where they're tracking pork from the slaughterhouse, I assume, or maybe from the farmer, all the way to your table, or at least through the Walmart stores, because you can truly use this distributed ledger in a very secure, encrypted, and way to track goods throughout the value chain, for example. And again, there are many more applications. This morning in another session, we heard about using blockchain by Sandy, what's his last name again? Yeah, from MIT, to track your digital self, your digital information. So with regard to information, asset tracking, this whole infrastructure will become much more smarter and secure, while at the same time continues to be attacked and threatened by cybersecurity issues. But next, I want to briefly touch on an energy infrastructure. If we move to electric cars or distributed energy storage, we all know the range anxiety that people with pure electric cars have, right? That the battery is the ranges that batteries can drive today is not as long yet as it should be. Or, of course, you're familiar, and the speaker, the keynote speaker also touched on that, on the issues with thermal runaway, for example, within lithium-ion batteries. And so one of the things that we have been working on, funded by ARPA-E in collaboration with LG and GM, is using optical fiber, the Bragg sensors within the optical fiber, to go within the electrolyte, within the lithium-ion batteries, to really measure the temperature there, and be able to accurately, again, sense the data within the batteries. There is easily a temperature differential of about 25 Celsius between measuring inside or outside, so you can prevent thermal runaway by detecting these minute changes much earlier. And these fibers, not only are they the actual sensors, they're also the optical communication of the digital information and the digital data. So they serve the two purposes of sensing and being the communication network. So within our bigger infrastructure, you can envision these kind of optical fibers and smarts being embedded in boats and airplanes and bridges to really sense and potentially understand reliability or other problems well before they occur. So again, another way how the IoT or the Internet of Everything and smart infrastructure will make our critical services inherently more reliable and secure and can transform our society. And then the third pillar is the real-time insights. So I'm up at the top here. I'm going to give you two examples. For example, urban mobility in big cities. It's a big problem with congestion and cars looking for parking spots. We did a project with LA and Denver to create a hyperlocal trip planner where not only do you have the public transport or walking or cars, but you do it multimodal, so you can easily integrate between going from a bike to a bus station and then maybe an Uber at the end. But the key thing was also to really hyper-local, work with the local universities to put their van service or and have the local bike rental stations and have this all very much optimized. But the other beauty of this is we have focused, based on a lot of ethnographic studies, to not only look at sooner and cheaper, but the greener option, to help individuals understand how can I
manage my own personal mobility within the city in a much more green way. And again, we also have a project with RPE here to help incentivize and come up with inherently incentives for people to use a more greener option and to truly understand the green option based on physics models and not just assessments or estimates. And so in addition to this, the city officials are very interested in these two cities. We also sold in Bangalore and in the northern France to get a dashboard to understand where are the bottlenecks in my city. I mean, really showing the data so they can make infrastructure both short-term, like a couple buses more or less trains or more bike stations, to really minimize the congestion within the city and make the city more livable. So again, these could be options that we could implement or that a city like Boston or the greater Boston community could also benefit from. Of course, in healthcare, at Xerox we have a $2.5 billion healthcare business where we have software in hospitals and et cetera. There is a lot of personal information now to provide better healthcare. In the future, in addition to all these wearable devices, et cetera, there is a lot of IP that has been created at Xerox and others, just a couple more minutes, to be able to remotely, through cameras, we can remotely sense vital signs and diseases, temperature, respiration rate, heart rate, but also potentially seeing if somebody has diabetes or an AFib situation coming on. Our breast cancer, we are starting a startup where to measure breast cancer based on slight variation in temperature. It's an old technology, but with all the data that's available now, it can potentially become a reality. And so with all of this, I mean, if these cameras around us or in our homes can actually measure all these vital signs and everything what you do, is at the end of privacy, right? Like, this is from iRobot here, I guess. I refuse to pick up this French fry. Lazy Bones can do it himself, right? Or the fridge, what was the fridge? Fatty Pants is kidding himself if he thinks he's eating less than 2,000 calories a day. There is so much, this is the end of privacy, right? And so, in fact, a lot of our data is private and secure when it's stored or when it's in transition because it's encrypted. But what happens if it's actually being analyzed by the service providers, right? If my Fitbit data about how I slept or my heart rate all day, if it goes to Fitbit, it's, as we also heard in another session this morning, during analytics, it's not encrypted. And so a lot of research is happening to come up with ways to be able to do analytics on encrypted data. And homomorphic, also by Sandy this morning was mentioned, homomorphic encryption is one way to do analytics on encrypted data, but it's still extremely slow. So you can only do some basic math, like classification, histogram. It has a long way to go. But the good thing is there is a lot of research, so we never have to take the data in its raw format and can really provide more privacy. Another thing is to let the data be at the edge. Let all my Fitbit data or let the personal data stay at the edge, and only exceptionally move to the service providers in the cloud. And so we're talking about, a lot is actually happening at the edges. For example, in our transportation business, we manage a lot of red light cameras, et cetera, but understanding what happens in intersections and be able to more quickly react. So there is, again, to minimize congestion on how the lights work, of course, but also to improve the safety. And having, whether it's with cameras or actually the waves from the EasyPass themselves, you can really create a lot of understanding of what's really happening in the intersections. And the Michigan, for example, has a mobility transportation center where a lot of companies come together to, again, create more safer mobility experiences and leveraging a lot of data and information. Because yes, this is real traffic cameras, and the cameras become smarter and smarter because through machine learning, which has existed now for quite a few decades, teaching cameras to really understand what is happening. Today, it is still mostly done by handcrafting, or at least up until a couple of years ago, handcrafting algorithms, supervised training. but with deep learning now really being adopted, especially in imaging, but well beyond that, thanks to the availability of a huge amount of big data and computer powers, these cameras are going to continue to become smarter and smarter going forward and truly understand what's happening, not only take images, but understand. And it's not only cameras, it's audio, it's text. So objects will be able to of course, hear, speak, read. And I thought if you pull this all together, I really want to end with this because Cynthia, Brazil, Chibo is a local company here in the Boston area, spin out of MIT Media Lab, that pulls all these smart technologies together in devices like Chibo that will really allow and make your life easier going forward. And as I said, the technology will ultimately really disappear into the fabric of our lives. And so ubiquitous real-time analytics will generate shockingly personally enhancements, I'm an optimist, you can see, of our lives, right? That's how IoT will truly transform how we live and educate and et cetera. So thank you.
This is probably too low-level technical question, but you intrigued me with pulling energy out of the printed sensor from its environment.
Yeah.
So assuming we have a wine bottle that can generate its own power and keep that data, how is that data gathered from my table? And I mean, I can see what the use of it is, but how does it transmit? Does it just tap into networks locally? Do you see all the networks being open source or open communication links?
So the sensor that I showed you had the antenna to capture the energy from the RF waves that come from the Wi-Fi devices, etc. So in that case, you only need a little bit of energy to continuously measure. With the wine bottle example or the initial label examples, they are bistable, for example. They use very little energy by themselves. And then the very first one where it's pure memory, you actually, with physical device, you would have to change the information as the bottle goes through the value chain. But of course, over time, as more smarts are embedded, then you need to have, you need to really be able to read information from the devices without physically touching it, right? Especially if there are millions around you. So there's a lot of research being done, and the applications are so diverse that, but yes, so with the antenna, it was basically harvesting the energy in your environment. Yeah. Yes, Mike.
Your prior slide, two questions. On your prior slide, Sophie, you had the shockingly personal enhancement of everyday life. There's so many different applications in IoT, but what would be your top 2 or 3 picks for the IoT applications that just really everyone's going to experience, see, and say, boy, this is fantastic?
Yeah. So they're emerging fast in healthcare and wellness right now, right? So I bet you many of us in the room have wearable devices that track not only our steps, etc., but now our sleeps, our heart rate, and more of the sensors will be able to track other vital signs and diseases. I mean, hospitals, especially with affordable care and outcome-based healthcare, will want to make sure if patients go home that they don't return them back to the hospital, so get hospital readmission down. So there are many experiments being done with either wearable or smart devices in the patient home. Of course, as I said earlier, the Internet of Industrial Things, like that's a term coined by GE, it's really where all the money comes from, and for a long time where all of the financial benefit will be. But I think from a personal healthcare, from a personal benefit, it is a lot of these analytics in these other devices. Like there are people that have learned that actually have AFib just by looking at their heart rate throughout the week and say, I had no clue, and yes, you do. And so that's really where I see it emerging first. But of course, in transportation, it's already there, right? Like EasyPass, that we just took down all the toll booths. Xerox runs EasyPass. We lost against Raytheon in Massachusetts, but we do the same. You take down the toll booths, everything is cameras. That's the Internet of Things. These cameras can read your license plates. In fact, 6 years ago, many of the license plates, you took a picture, it got sent to India, where 5 people would type in what they saw on the license plate, and then whatever. Most of the time it got correct, and you got the correct bill. All of that is now smart imaging. It's all video analytics, it's all image analytics. And so that is there, being implemented in the transportation infrastructure. It's really all around us. So I would say transportation and healthcare.
One more question.
Yeah, okay.
You talk about changing from point-to-point communication to information-centric communication. How long is that process going to take, and how will it manifest itself in the speeds that we typically see, let's say, in the office or at home? And you also mentioned 2 companies you're working with. Would you care to share the names?
Yes, a couple things. Number one, this, again, as a lot of research, like the flexible electronics started 15 years ago, originally funded by the government, organizations like NIST. The information-centric networking also started close to 15 years ago in the PARC labs, as well as now several other universities are working on it. IETF is making it into a standard, international standards, one of those work groups. Working with a lot of the telecommunication companies, we've worked with multiple different parties. I think the 5G standard, wireless standard, is where this will first demonstrate or be used, because at the edge, when people switch or are driving or are mobile, or it's where the best business use cases exist. But you can Google either content, the two that I listed there were the research groups. We call it content-centric networking. One of our guys went to UCLA, and they call it a named data networking, but the standard is being based, and the industry name now that we all agree to is information-centric networking, which makes a lot of sense. But if you Google it, you'll see a lot of use cases that are being built. Yes?
Sophie, while I concur that there's an awful lot of money in the industrial Internet of Things, we've done some work recently for Intel, specifically with Wind River, who have a big interest in this. And what they're seeing, what we're seeing when we went and looked hard at it, was that the big barrier to adoption is there's just not very many people in the potential domains of application who understand how to move an Internet of Things business case through an organization. Even if the technology is ostensibly relatively straightforward, you've got huge barriers in terms of organizational comprehension. And starting with, for example, I want to apply the Internet of Things. Whose budget does this sit on? Does it sit on IT's budget? Does it sit on manufacturing's budget? Does it sit on logistics budget? If it runs cross-functionally and it cuts across functions, you can't figure out how to write the business case for it.
So, and your
like
customer, what is the application for IoT?
We looked at scores of applications.
Okay,
The question they were asking was, why are we not seeing anything like the uptake that we think we should be seeing? We've got the technology, it's stable, it's mature, we know how to go do
like
this.
smart lighting or...
Yeah, and the flip side of this, because as you can imagine, Wind River is embedded in more than 50% of all of the IoT stuff out there, and they're looking and going, why isn't everybody buying this? How do we overcome that challenge, that there's a real limitation on the customer side in terms of people who know how to think about this economically in practical terms and to move it through an organization?
Again, I would need to know more about the details, but hospitals are starting to look at it, again, to remotely manage and monitor patients. Cities are starting to look at it to remotely manage mobility, but all of that is through service providers, like companies like, whether it's, again, of course, Xerox, but Cisco. There are many providers that are making embedding smart cameras or smart other devices within the way they provide the service, because it is just a more accurate, faster, more automated way of doing things, right? And so, again, I would need to look more at the specifics of the business case. So that's why if you do it with a service provider, you don't necessarily have the upfront investment. The whole investment Rachel made in the Easy Pass with all these cameras, a lot of money goes in there, right? It takes a long time to ultimately write it off and have sufficient income and profit coming in. And so, each business case is different. And I think with the challenges now with the security issues like this Mirai botnet attack that many of the IoT devices, even the Fitbit has been broken into, or fridges, or they have been able to remotely crack or hack into pacemakers, right? So it's a challenge. It's really a challenge. So really, design for security for these devices need to be much better than what it is today. Many questions.
How do you think about regulation and the ability of people to opt in or out of this ubiquitous IoT world? I mean, think about sort of an Amazon device or Google device in your house, and if they can collect whatever data they collect for the ostensible purpose you bought it, but then they also can talk to that wine bottle sitting on the table. Or, you know, look at your email, put it all together.
Or the echo.
How do you think about that? I don't want to know how many wine bottles I have. And how quickly they're opened and not.
But they will know, they will know. I think that's why the more we can move things to the edge, right, and allow people to control their own data, and exception only going to the cloud, like with the smart cameras, if you remotely monitor elderly people or whatever. Right now, all the images are going, and then they're processed at the service provider, and then action is being taken if needed. If a lot of that computation can happen at the edge is really what I think, and regulations could help. If regulations make some of these privacy requirements more explicit, then maybe the technology will happen more quickly to allow people to control their own privacy better, right? Because again, I don't even like that they all know exactly when I sleep and my heart rate, and it might be getting high here right now, but so and the regulations definitely can help as it comes with, and I think there were some sessions that are happening this week on trying to understand how to make sure that all these devices that are becoming connected are much more secure. Like the Mirai virus, the problem was most individuals leave the default password and username, and most companies have the same password and username on all of the same devices that they sell, and so if you never change it, then it's actually easy to break in. But there are simple things you can do, like whitelisting programs and having some other stuff, and really making sure that maybe every device leaves the factory with a separate username and password, and then captured in the blockchain somehow. And I mean, so the technologies could get you there, but with the help of regulations, it could actually go faster.
So would you be in favor of regulation that would kind of guarantee some of these things? Or?
Yeah, I come from Europe originally, so yes, I am. Yeah. It's important for privacy.
What's the role of the risk transfer industry in some of this? Insurance. Arguably, the insurance industry has driven some significant policy changes because they could put a value on risk, and there was some economic benefit to buying down that risk. Any thought on how this would happen? You know, we have the vehicles that can tell if you're going fast and your premiums go up or down, but now we're talking about an order of magnitude greater. Have they been brought up to the conversation to see where this could possibly go?
I maybe there are experts that know about this here. Yeah, why don't you answer?
Sorry, in the spirit of full disclosure, Swiss Re,
Yeah.
you may have heard, is a client. Yes, they're thinking about it. They're thinking about it really hard. The primary concerns are not actually...
The microphone.
Sorry. The primary concerns on the insurance side are actually two relatively unusual considerations. One of them is ethical or regulatory constraints on what you can do and not do. Even if it's legal, it may not be ethical to use the information that way. As a concrete example for that, one of the UK retail motor insurers was planning to use information from Facebook as the basis for identifying people with good risks. The problem is that's prima facie illegal, because in order to identify somebody as a good risk, you must also decide that someone else is a bad risk. And deciding that someone is a bad risk on the basis of an algorithm which hasn't been validated breaks a whole variety of laws. The second one is a subtle one, which is insurance instruments, unlike most financial instruments, don't have well-established codification and digital property rights. So if you go look at an insurance contract, you can assign some metadata to it, but actually figuring out how you parse the risk that's involved in a motor contract is really freaking hard. There's like no ontology and no overall taxonomy of the way in which you think about risk or dread risk, because of the way the actuarial industry has evolved. So they're thinking about it really hard. There's an IoT exchange initiative underway being driven by this. If you're particularly interested in this, there's an InsurTech session coming up in this city, which is one of the primary locuses for innovation in this, because we've got a whole variety of the retail insurers here. And that InsurTech event is coming up on the 5th or the 6th. So.
Good.
Sorry.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.